This 1997 article by Steve Kangas is based, in part, on the original 1995 edition of William Blum's Killing Hope, US Military and CIA Interventions Since World War II, published by Common Courage Press. The publisher's blurb on the 2014 updated edition asks, "Is the United States a force for democracy?" In this classic and unique volume that answers this question, William Blum serves up a forensic overview of US foreign policy spanning 60 years. For those who want the details of our most famous actions, Chile, Cuba, Vietnam, to name a few, and for those who want to learn about our lesser-known efforts, France, China, Bolivia, Brazil, for example, this book provides a window on what our foreign policy goals really are. If you flip over the rock of American foreign policy of the past century, this is what crawls out: invasions, bombings, overthrowing governments, occupations, suppressing movements for social change, assassinating political leaders, perverting elections, manipulating labor unions, manufacturing news, death squads, torture, biological warfare, depleted uranium, drug trafficking, mercenaries. It's not a pretty picture. It's enough to give imperialism a bad name. What follows in this video is from the Kangas summary in his 1997 article. Remember that at least 20 years has passed since he compiled this litany of destruction. According to Kangas, CIA operations follow the same recurring script. First, American business interests abroad are threatened by a popular or democratically elected leader. The people support their leader because he intends to conduct land reform, strengthen unions, redistribute wealth, nationalize foreign-owned industry, and regulate business to protect workers, consumers, and the environment. So, on behalf of American business, and often with their help, the CIA mobilizes the opposition. First, it identifies right-wing groups within the country, usually the military, and offers them a deal. "We'll put you in power if you maintain a favorable business climate for us." The agency then hires, trains, and works with them to overthrow the existing government, usually a democracy. It uses every trick in the book: propaganda, stuffed ballot boxes, purchased elections, extortion, blackmail, sexual intrigue, false stories about opponents in the local media, infiltration, and disrupting opposing political parties, kidnapping, beating, torture, intimidation, economic sabotage, death squads, and even assassination. These efforts culminate in a military coup, which installs a right-wing dictator. The CIA trains the dictator's security apparatus to crack down on the traditional enemies of big business, using interrogation, torture, and murder. The victims are said to be communists, but almost always they are just peasants, liberals, moderates, labor union leaders, political opponents, and advocates of free speech and democracy. Widespread human rights abuses follow. This scenario has been repeated so many times that the CIA actually teaches it in a special school, the notorious School of the Americas. It opened in Panama but later moved to Fort Benning, Georgia. Critics have nicknamed it the School of the Dictators and School of the Assassins. Here the CIA trains Latin American military officers how to conduct coups, including the use of interrogation, torture, and murder. The Association for Responsible Dissent estimates that by 1987, 6 million people had died as a result of CIA covert operations. Former State Department official William Blum correctly calls this an American Holocaust. The CIA justifies these actions as part of its war against communism. But most coups do not involve a communist threat. Unlucky nations are targeted for a wide variety of reasons, not only threats to American business interests abroad, but also liberal or even moderate social reforms, political instability, the unwillingness of a leader to carry out Washington's dictates, and declarations of neutrality in the Cold War. Indeed, nothing has infuriated CIA directors quite like our nation's desire to stay out of the Cold War. The ironic thing about all this intervention is that it frequently fails to achieve American objectives. Often the newly installed dictator grows comfortable with the security apparatus the CIA has built for him. He becomes an expert at running a police state. And because the dictator knows he cannot be overthrown, he becomes independent and defiant of Washington's will. The CIA then finds it cannot overthrow him because the police and military are under the dictator's control, afraid to operate with American spies for fear of torture and execution. The only two options for the US at this point are impotence or war. Examples of this boomerang effect include the Shah of Iran, General Noriega, and Saddam Hussein. The boomerang effect also explains why the CIA has proven highly successful at overthrowing democracies, but a wretched failure at overthrowing dictatorships. The following timeline should confirm that the CIA, as we know it, should be abolished and replaced by a true information gathering and analysis organization. The CIA cannot be reformed. It is institutionally and culturally corrupt. In a speech before the CIA, celebrating its 50th anniversary, President Clinton said, "By necessity, the American people will never know the full story of your courage." Clinton's is a common defense of the CIA, namely that the American people should stop criticizing the CIA because they don't know what it really does. This, of course, is the heart of the problem in the first place. An agency that is above criticism is also above moral behavior and reform. Its secrecy and lack of accountability allows its corruption to grow unchecked. Furthermore, Clinton's statement is simply untrue. The history of the agency is growing painfully clear, especially with the declassification of historical CIA documents. We may not know the details of specific operations, but we do know quite well the general behaviour of the CIA. These facts began emerging nearly 2 decades ago at an ever-quickening pace. Today we have a remarkably accurate and consistent picture, repeated in country after country, and verified from countless directions. The CIA's response to this growing knowledge and criticism follows a typical historical pattern. Indeed, there are remarkable parallels to the medieval church's fight against the scientific revolution. The first journalists and writers to reveal the CIA's criminal behavior were harassed and censored if they were American writers, and tortured and murdered if they were foreigners. See Philip A.G.'s On the Run for an example of early harassment. However, over the last 2 decades, the tide of evidence has become overwhelming, and the CIA has found that it does not have enough fingers to plug every hole in the dike. This is especially true in the age of the Internet, where information flows freely amongst millions of people. Since censorship is impossible, the agency must now defend itself with apologetics. Clinton's "Americans will never know" defense is a prime example. Another common apologetic is that the world is filled with unsavory characters and we must deal with them if we are to protect American interests at all. There are 2 things wrong with this. First, it ignores the fact that the CIA has regularly spurned alliances with defenders of democracy, free speech, and human rights, preferring the company of military dictators and tyrants. The CIA had moral options available to them, but it did not take them. Second, this argument begs several questions. The first is, which American interests? The CIA has courted right-wing dictators because they allow wealthy Americans to exploit the country's cheap labor and resources. But poor and middle-class Americans pay the price whenever they fight the wars that stem from CIA actions, from Vietnam to the Gulf War to Panama. The second begged question is, why should American interests come at the expense of other people's human rights? The CIA should be abolished, its leadership dismissed, and its relevant members tried for crimes against humanity. Our intelligence community should be rebuilt from the ground up, with the goal of collecting and analyzing information. As for covert action, there are 2 moral options. The first one is to eliminate covert action completely, but this gives jitters to people worried about the Adolf Hitlers of the world. So a second option is that we can place covert action under extensive and true democratic oversight. For example, a bipartisan congressional committee of 40 members could review and veto all aspects of CIA operations upon a majority or supermajority vote. Which of these 2 options is best may be the subject of debate, but one thing is clear. Like dictatorship, like monarchy, unaccountable covert operations should die, like the dinosaurs they are.